New World simply needs catch-up mechanics because it's leaving some players behind and it's off-putting to new players to not have them. Or if they're not going to implement catch-up mechanics right now, we at least need to know that it's something that is planned. Now, before I continue, do please come over and follow me on Twitch. Quite frankly, the best live content you can get on Twitch. Okay, that's not true, but come and follow me anyway, please. Okay, so let's break down the progression as it currently is in its simplest form. Now, I'm going to ignore things like professions and that kind of thing, so it's literally just going to be the core progression here. But overall, we have the leveling experience from 1 to 60. Beyond that, your next goal is really to get your expertise up to 600 and then your gear score up to 600. You essentially do those two things at the same time. And that's how the game launched until we had this third progression, which is this Umbral Shard system, which is basically a way of upgrading your gear from 600 to 625. The game is now about 5 months old, and that's the progression that we currently have. The Umbral Shard system, however, is only about 1 month old. And generally, I personally wouldn't expect a catch-up mechanic on a system that is that new. Do you know what I mean? I wouldn't expect the Umbral Shard system to necessarily have a catch-up mechanic, but it sort of feels like they're doing one, but I actually think that's actually not a catch-up mechanic, but a design change. However, what I'm personally think we need is a catch-up mechanic for the 2 earlier progression systems. Now, some of you will be sat there rightly thinking, hey, Jay, haven't they added some catch-up mechanics like in the latest patch? They're increasing the amount of XP you get from quests, they're reducing the amount of XP you need from level 30 onwards, and to that I say yes, they are definitely doing stuff like that, but for me, those kind of changes I don't think are going to go far enough for me to say, hey, if you're a new player, you'll have an easier time leveling, please come and do it. And I primarily say that because there's then 2 further progressions beyond that, and I just don't think, like, as a new player, leveling solo would be a very fun experience right now, so I strongly think that they need a better catch-up mechanic. Now, this is where we might get a little bit controversial right off the bat, because I personally wouldn't actually mind a cash store item that let you basically skip through some of the content a little bit quicker, maybe like an XP booster and that kind of thing, because I think now is essentially the time to add that kind of stuff. Now, I'd only want it if it went up to level 60, and actually ideally I wouldn't want it at all. I'd rather have them so that they design the game that it's a lot quicker now to level through, because they appreciate that the players who are behind probably aren't going to want to do progression 1, progression 2 and then onto the progression 3. They just want to like get to what is currently the end game. So I think just making the game much more easier to level in would be the optimal play, but beyond that, I wouldn't mind a cash store item. It wouldn't be great, but it sort of seems inevitable anyway, so maybe now would be the time for that. Like, I don't really mind whatever way they necessarily decide to do it. I just want a way that new players can start the game and get up to speed a little bit quicker than what we did now. Because basically, if a new player was to start now, it would take them as long as it's taken me to get from 0 to where I am without much increase in speed. And that means they'll always be behind because there isn't really any proper catch-up mechanics. And then we move on to progression number 2. Now, this is basically what the game launched with. This was the end game of the original game, which was basically, okay, now you're going to have to get your expertise from 500 to 600, and then you want to get better gear, getting your gear score from 500 to 600, and normally they are in conjunction with each other, because as you get your expertise up, that means the quality of the drops you're getting also goes up. Now, I do have a bit of a concern there that I actually think that the gear that gets dropped, not really that useful, therefore this whole system sort of a little bit flawed, but let's not stress about that right now here. Now, I'm not necessarily sure I would have argued the case for a catch-up mechanic if we were just in this secondary progression phase and we hadn't had the new progression phase of having the Umbral Shards and getting your gear score up to 625. But because we've had that third progression, which the developers in the January dev talk do actually say that they think it came a little bit too soon, and they admit that, which I do think is a good sign, because I do agree that it did come too soon. But the reality is we have this third progression now, therefore I think they might as well do a catch-up mechanic in that secondary progression just to get people to the most latest up-to-date progression, because it's not like this progression is optional. You still have to do it to get up to the latest and greatest stuff that people are doing with these mutations. You're already going to be a little bit behind in progression 3 because some people are on M7s, M8s, M9s and M10s and that kind of thing. Even if you got there right now, you're still technically behind a lot of the players, which is fine because you're obviously starting late or you're a little bit behind, but they need to be a way of getting you to that point a lot quicker. For me, I'd like the catch-up mechanics to be planned and implemented at the right time. To me, the right time to implement a catch-up mechanic for this expertise expertise and gear score grind was basically when they introduced that new progression. It should have happened a month ago, basically. Now, you might be sat there thinking, wasn't the gypsum and the gypsum orbs and cast the way of doing a catch-up mechanic? But that's not really the way that that was pitched. That was pitched more of a way of being able to control the speed at which you are consistently progressing. It wasn't pitched as an idea of getting you up to the 600 quicker than people who are already there. So I personally don't believe that that is a catch-up mechanic. However, those systems could very easily be used as a catch-up mechanic, and it wouldn't actually invalidate any of the old content. And to some extent, they sort of are doing this, because in the PTR patch for February, you're going to be able to get gypsum orbs in 2 different ways. You're going to be able to get them from the faction vendor, and apparently some quests in Reekwater and Shattered Mountain are also going to give gypsum orbs, which is a nice little touch, and giving you more gypsum is obviously a way of getting you more casts, which means that your gear score will go up a little bit quicker. But again, I don't really feel like that's enough. What they could do with those gypsum casts, instead of having the expertise be a minimum of 2 and a maximum of 5, they could give you massive amounts of expertise bumps from them casts. They could very easily, I would have to presume, change this to maybe like a minimum of 15 and a maximum of 25. And if you do something like that, this secondary progression of getting your gear score up is really decreased by a significant amount. And then players can crack on with the latest and greatest type of progression. Granted, that actually wouldn't increase your gear score per se, it would increase your expertise, but your gear score would then follow from that. And actually, I would like a way of getting easier gear score 600 stuff. Right now, I think the barrier to entry for that is actually too difficult. But to be fair, getting weapons from the expeditions isn't that hard, and that actually makes up a fair chunk of your gear score. But for your actual armor, I'd like to see like a boost to crafting, or like named armor drops be a lot more present in the dungeons. So the gypsum casts are definitely one way that they could very easily implement a catch-up mechanic and announce that that's what they're going to do and that's why they're going to do it. I want them to say, hey, we appreciate that we added some more progression. Now's the time for us to give you catch-up mechanics for the previous ones so that people can catch up and get to where the majority of the player base is. So what I'm saying right now is that there's a lot of people who are on the latest and most up-to-date progression system, and this is the Umbral Shard system, but there's 2 previous progression systems that players have to get to this point. And I think for casual players and generally the health of the game, it would be a good thing to have catch-up mechanics to let players get to that point. They already have systems that would enable it, so let's see it. Now, you might be thinking that the Umbral Shard changes are a catch-up mechanic. What I'm talking about there is we're going to get more Umbral Shards from the Gypsum cast, and we're going to get Umbral Shards from Outpost Rush and that kind of thing. But I actually don't think that that is a catch-up mechanic. I think that that is basically they realized there was a flaw in their design in that they were funneling people only to the expedition mutators, and they are now correcting that. I don't think that's a catch-up mechanic for people who are basically not up to 625 gear score, if that makes sense. Now, maybe I'm wrong, but we haven't seen any reasoning, so I think it's safe to assume that actually the Umbral Shards was just undertuned in a way, and this isn't a catch-up mechanic. Firstly, what I would like to see is an acknowledgement that we actually need catch-up mechanics and that they are planned. And secondly, I would like them to simply implement them as soon as possible for the leveling and the expertise and gear score grind. They make lots of little changes, but I'd quite like to see an actual like patch that says, okay, this time we're doing a catch-up mechanic for this progression, and that's because we want people to be on the latest progression system. There'll be some people who say, why should the people who come after me have an easier time? Well, we need it for the health of the game. I'm personally on gear score 617, so what I'm advocating for isn't actually going to help me, but I actually do think it would help the health of the game long term. I want to be able to say to new players, yes, start playing, you won't be very long before you're up with us and we can actually play with me and other people of my ilk. As of right now, I'd say it would take too long for you to get to where I am. In fact, it would probably take you as long as it took me to get here. Obviously, Amazon have the system where they want to time gate you. Well, they need to remove those time gates when progression gets advanced. Not doing so means that everybody else who's fallen behind or hasn't started yet is never going to catch up. The little things they do are nice, but I definitely would like to see some major changes with regard to this, and I want to see it actually communicated from them that that is the intent and they understand that that's a problem. They already admitted that the Umbral Shard system possibly came too soon. Well, you've already made your bed, now lie in it and give us the catch-up mechanics for the previous 2 progression systems. Come and follow me on Twitch. Probably not the greatest stream on Twitch, I've got to admit that, but come and follow me anyway. Like this video, comment if you have any thoughts on this subject, subscribe to this channel if you're interested in New World and MMOs in general. Have a most beautiful day. Goodbye.